Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And since I wasn't able to get to the floor when my honourable colleague from Skeena-Bulkley Valley was speaking, I want to thank him for his remarks. I think it is very important, and I'm pleased to hear the official opposition train a light on the question of the economics for this country and what's generally considered an unquestioned benefit of developing in the oil sands. Now, there are, of course, benefits economically to developing in the oil sands, but there are huge economic risks in putting all our eggs in the bitumen basket. And so I appreciated my friend from Skeena-Bulkley Valley saying, what's Plan B? Doesn't seem to me that the current administration has a Plan B. And although it's not the subject or pith and substance of the bill before us to discuss that, I did want to underline that it's important that we not just examine what's wrong with putting all our eggs in the bitumen basket from the point of view of the threat to British Columbia's wilderness of these ill-advised, risky pipeline schemes and the risks to our coastline of putting bitumen mixed with toxic fossil fuel condensates called diluents, call it dilbit, and ship it to refineries overseas. This whole project of deciding that Canada is better off when we take a resource from northern Alberta, don't process it in Canada, but put it in pipelines to ship other places without any consideration of the climate impact, without any consideration of the environmental threats, the failure to even examine whether the economics line up is something that is astounding. And I'm pleased to hear another member raise that issue in this place. But I wanted to address the bill itself. It's, as we know, it's an omnibus budget bill. It's, again, over 400 pages. It's the kind of abuse of Parliament that really does constitute a daily contempt of democratic process in this place. Here's a bill that covers everything from aerodrome regulation through to getting rid of the Canadian Polar Commission and replacing it with the Cambridge Bay Research Station, what's now called the CHAR. We have sections of this bill that deal with patent legislation, and we're told by experts in patent that they're not properly thought through and will cause real problems. We have changes in social assistance that appear to be targeting the most vulnerable in our society. And I want to speak more to this issue about the way in which this piece of legislation will affect refugees. We have changes here in the way the Canadian Public Health Officer is allowed to run the department. These are very profound changes, and I wanted, before getting into the detail of the individual changes, make the point again that making changes in myriad unrelated sections, most of them non-budgetary, is an offense to parliamentary process. I've raised this point in points of order, Mr. Speaker, and take your explanation that it is up to the House itself to set some parameters around omnibus budget bills. But it must be said again that up until this current Privy Council and Prime Minister, we have never had omnibus budget bills topping each year a spring budget bill, a fall budget bill. So we have about 900 pages of legislation in 2012, 2013, and 2014 in these omnibus forms, which are then, the contempt is compounded because none of these are adequately studied. Most of them go through the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee finds itself trying to deal with questions about high Arctic polar research or how aerodromes should be run. One piece of legislation should properly be before the Transport Committee. Another piece of legislation should properly be before the Environment Committee. But oh no, they're all bundled up and stuffed down the throats of the Finance Committee. So on top of having them in omnibus form, we also have time allocations. So there's not the time to bring in the witnesses who could explain all the provisions of how this bill will affect myriad areas of public policy. So that's offensive. And then on top of that, we had this placed through independent motions of 20 different committees that were amazingly, what a coincidence, identical motions last fall for the purpose of limiting the rights of members of Parliament from smaller parties, such as my own role as leader of the Green Party, or that of colleagues who sit as independents, or of the newly formed Force et Démocratie or the Bloc Québécois. Our opportunities to debate and to present substantive amendments at report stage have been eliminated by the, well, I have to say it's a Machiavellian expedient of 20 different motions and 20 different legislative committees that create the bogus opportunity, which I'll put in quotes, the opportunity for members such as myself to present amendments in each of those committees. Some of these committees meet at the same time, Mr. Speaker. I won't go into the details of how coercive and difficult and unfair this measure has been. Never in the history of Canada has a majority party gone to such lengths to shut down individual members of Parliament. In any case, I'd like to turn to the aspects of this bill that are most egregious. I'm very concerned about the change in the management of the Canadian Public Health Officer. Changing his role from being the person responsible for his department to being subservient to a president for the organization and no longer a deputy minister. I think the Public Health Office, it's a relatively new institution in the history of this Parliament, but it's an important office. And when we face public health threats, we need to know that our Canadian Public Health Officer is not going to risk being told, we'd rather you not talk about that now, sir or madam. We want to keep that under wraps for a while. That's a very dangerous road to go down, and it's being accomplished in this bill as an omnibus budget bill. I'm also very concerned about the changes that have been made to the provisions that deal with, and it's really quite, it was almost under the radar before people noticed it. It wasn't trumpeted. But the changes to the ways in which the federal government transfers money to provinces and the requirements around that transfer. In the past, social assistance transfers did not have residency requirements, and certainly there were provisions to make sure that the most needy would always be able to get social assistance. Well, this opens the door. The changes that are being made in sections 172 and 173 of Bill C-43 will make it much harder for refugees to gain that desperate assistance, the most vulnerable people in our society, people who get here with just the clothes on their backs. It will be open to a province. This doesn't accomplish it in one fell swoop, but it's the first step in saying that a refugee claimant will not be able to get social assistance. It opens the door to provinces to make those kinds of changes. There are also changes in the Canadian Intellectual Property Office. Now, these are not changes that affect the question of justice and fairness and equity in our society, but what they will do is make the whole area of patent law much less certain, much more confusing, and these amendments were recommended by experts in patent law, but as were all opposition amendments, ignored and voted down in committee. The piece of legislation that creates the Canadian High Arctic Research Station at the same time eliminates what was previously the Canadian Polar Research Station and the Canadian Polar Research Commission. It's not at all clear how the two will merge. This bill repeals the Polar Research Station. Of course, the current Canadian High Arctic Research Station, which is in the front window as the current administration's commitment to science, it must be noted that this facility being built in Cambridge Bay in the Minister of Environment's riding is designed not to do any research on climate. It's designed not to do any research on ozone. It is specifically focused on research for resource development in the Arctic, and it certainly is to be commended for highlighting the important role, the essential role of Indigenous knowledge going forward and traditional knowledge. But it is hardly appropriate in this day and age to focus so much research money in the Arctic and ignore climate and ozone and the toxics that concentrate in the body fat of the wildlife that people of the North rely on for country food. Je vais faire un petit résumé, Monsieur le Président. C'est incroyable pour moi que nous avons eu les projets de loi budgétaires omnibus chaque année après un projet de loi omnibus dans le printemps, un autre projet de loi omnibus dans l'automne. Et chaque fois, avec les changements graves dans plusieurs d'autres statuts du Canada, sans l'occasion, sans l'opportunité pour études, pour discours, pour débat suffisant pour ces changements profonds. Mr. Speaker, it is an offense to this place that we continually have omnibus budget bills forced down our throats, and then forced down our throats quickly with time allocation. Once more, Mr. Speaker, as a member of Parliament, I protest against these offensive measures that strike to the heart of the role of parliamentarians. Thank you.